So since the release of the guide to the proposed basin plan, there's been significant debate about the need to balance environmental, economic and social outcomes. Thinking about this within a benefit-cost framework helps to highlight some of the main issues. I'll do that briefly and highlight some of the work we've done looking at the impacts of reductions in water availability before turning to some of the options available to reduce the cost of the plan. As a starting point, the benefits of the plan should outweigh its costs. The first issue is that nearly all of the benefits and some of the costs are difficult to quantify. The majority of environmental benefits are not valued in markets, and some of the costs fall into the same category. For example, it's difficult to estimate the cost of stress associated with unemployment or having to relocate. But we do have some information on costs. We know how much it's costing to purchase water. If we can purchase water at around $2,000 a megalitre, then we need the additional environmental benefit that's generated to be at least that much. But there'll be other costs as well, predominantly adjustment costs that are borne by those in the areas most impacted. Regardless of whether a full valuation is possible, it's important that the full scope of benefits and costs be understood, including how they change with changes in sustainable diversion limits. One of the difficulties in achieving a balance is that while many of the benefits accrue to society in general, the adjustment costs will be highly concentrated. Achieving an effective balance is likely to require assistance to mitigate adjustment costs without distorting the incentives for water to be used in its highest value uses. While the government commitment to meet the required reductions through investments in water savings and purchasing water entitlements will mitigate many of the costs, especially for irrigators, some adjustment costs will remain, and it's important that they are understood. These costs will be determined to a large extent by changes in the pattern of irrigated agricultural production. And we've done some work on that. For the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, looking at the impact of SDLs in isolation, and for the Environment Department, looking at the net effect after water purchases and infrastructure investments have been taken into account. The results I'm going to talk about today are for the 3,500 gigalitre scenario, the middle scenario, outlined in the guide. Overall, we think the analysis we've undertaken provides a good picture of potential impacts at the regional level, given the information that's available. But there are some limitations which need to be understood. The main ones are listed here, and I'll mention some of them later, but for things that I won't remind you about again, you should keep in mind that water supply variability is not included. We only look at changes in average water use. Any increase in variability would increase costs. The only productivity improvement included is from increased water use efficiency through infrastructure investment. So new technologies or management methods aren't considered. The detail of implementation is not known, right? And that detail is going to be important. This goes back to the first point about variability. And transitional impacts are important. The models give us a good idea of the before and the after, but you have to look at the results carefully to get a good idea of the transitional costs. This is the impact on basin-wide gross value of irrigated agricultural production, GVIAP, of the SDLs alone. So no water purchase or infrastructure investment. Once the SDLs are implemented in all regions, we expect a 15% fall in GVIAP. The blue line is the estimate when we include water purchases and infrastructure investment. We've assumed that water purchases to bridge the gap to the SDLs will occur between now and when they're implemented. So this brings forward the reductions in irrigated production. So that's the blue line below the orange line until about 2014. The infrastructure investment closes part of the gap to the SDLs. So the final reduction in GVIAP falls to around 10%. The change in irrigated production has implications for upstream and downstream industries and regional economies and communities. This is where the impacts start, so it's useful to unpack them a bit. This is the regional impact on GVIAP in dollar terms. The regions are ordered from highest to lowest change from the baseline, so that's the difference between the blue and the orange bars. You can see the impacts vary quite a bit across regions, with the biggest fall expected in the Murrumbidgee. This is the change in output by activity. Cotton and rice are expected to experience the biggest falls in absolute terms at $216 and $120 million a year. The least affected commodities are expected to be vegetables, fruit and nuts and grapes. These results are consistent with water being traded away from lower valued activities first. Impacts are concentrated. These are the top 10 by activity by region. They account for about 55% of the total reduction. Obviously, rice in the Murrumbidgee is where the biggest impact is expected. Knowing exactly where the impacts are likely to be would be useful for governments and communities in developing responses, but this is as far as we can confidently disaggregate the results. There's a number of risks in trying to predict socio-economic impacts at too fine a scale, not the least of which is providing policymakers and communities with a false sense of the accuracy of the estimates. The location of impacts will largely be determined by which irrigators decide to sell their entitlements to the government. Our irrigation survey tells us that it's difficult to identify parts of a region as being more likely to participate in water purchase programs. There's also uncertainties as to the timing of impacts, as the purchase of water is expected to occur over a relatively long time frame. And it's difficult to predict when critical thresholds for some businesses are likely to be reached. For example, you may well be able to say that the number of processors is likely to fall from 8 to 6, but predicting which 2 will close and when is quite a different matter. But looking at the locations of where the various activities are undertaken can give a good indication of impacts. In general, impacts will be greatest close to the locations where production falls. This is a map of land use in the Southern Basin. We think that irrigated crops and pastures are most affected, so it's the yellow and the red areas we're interested in. Yellow's irrigated crops and red's irrigated pasture. Now, this type of information can be combined with knowledge about the relative adaptive capacity of different areas, which would include factors like the economic diversity of a region, a range of demographic information, to get a better idea about which areas are likely to have the most difficulty in adapting. I don't have time now, but we've done a report on the relative community vulnerability of regions, which is summarised in our paper. The assessment of economy-wide impacts includes, on the negative side, a fall in irrigated agricultural production, funds for water purchases and investments in infrastructure come from elsewhere in the economy. On the positive side of the ledger, we have a small increase in dryland agriculture. We have an increase in activity associated with the infrastructure spending, and we have an injection of funds from water sales. At a national and basin level, the impacts are modest. And importantly, the impact at a basin level is mitigated by government actions. As this chart shows, we expect a fall in basin level gross regional product of 0.7%. That's with the government actions included, so the blue line. If we don't include government actions, the fall's larger at 1.3%. The long-run employment impacts are lower than the GRP impacts in percentage terms. Labor is assumed to move between regions and sectors. This is not to say that employment in irrigated agriculture and related industries won't decline. It will. But across the basin as a whole, the long-run reduction in jobs is expected to be small, especially when you consider the estimates are against a background of an economy that's expected to continue to grow. Employment in the basin in aggregate is expected to continue to increase, but employment and population in some areas of the basin is likely to fall. And the impacts in the short run will be more substantial. It will take time for labour and capital to be re-employed. For example, if we assume that the full reduction in water use to 2014 is sourced at one point in time and that there's no investment in infrastructure, we estimate a short-run reduction of around 5,000 jobs in the basin. Now, this is like a worst-case scenario and is likely to be an overestimate of what would actually occur for two main reasons. The purchase of entitlements over an extended period of time means that the adjustment costs will also occur over a number of years. We've started down this path already with the purchases that have occurred so far. And the impact will be offset by water savings obtained from investments in irrigation infrastructure and in the short term by the stimulus associated with that construction. Regardless of whether the benefits and costs can be fully quantified, we want to minimise the cost of meeting our environmental objectives. Now, there's two important questions. Are there ways of reducing the volume of water required to meet environmental objectives? And are there ways for the environmental water holder to operate that might reduce the costs of delivering the water required? Now, on the first question, it would seem that investment in environmental works and measures to reduce water requirements are worth investigating. There are examples where these types of investments are cost effective. An issue, though, is how these investments fit within a program designed to improve environmental outcomes across the basin rather than just at specific sites. So where environmental water is used more than once, it will be important to account for the actual savings rather than site-specific savings. The second question's about the types of water products that the environmental water holder might hold and the way in which they might operate in the water market. Because of the nature of environmental water demand, it would appear that the water holder could reduce the cost of achieving some objectives by sourcing some of the water on the temporary market. It might also be useful for the water holder to be able to lease allocations to the irrigation sector in periods where that water is not required for environmental purposes. This would be especially valuable in drought periods. As we saw during the drought, the allocation market was very important in minimising the costs of water shortages. Of course, doing this would not be straightforward. As well as the complex task of matching environmental water requirements with a portfolio of water products that minimises costs, the environmental water holder would be a large player in the market with the potential to affect prices. So the governance arrangements around operating in the market would need to be carefully considered. So to conclude, obviously we want the benefits to be greater than the costs, but it will be difficult to tell if we've achieved a balance in reallocating water. Some comparisons are possible, but we need to be careful to compare like with like. One of the difficulties is that while many of the benefits accrue to society in general, adjustment costs will be highly concentrated. Modest higher level impacts should not be seen as diminishing the importance of impacts at a lower level. Regions that are heavily involved in annual broadacre activities, especially rice and cotton, are likely to be most affected. Uncertainty over the location and timing of impacts is inevitable. We should remember that impacts will become evident as the water purchase program proceeds. Effectively monitoring impacts as they occur would assist in providing targeted and timely assistance. And finally, it will be important to ensure that we minimise the cost of meeting environmental objectives. Allowing the environmental water holder to trade on the temporary market and works and measures that reduce the volume of water required to meet an objective are two options that look to be worthwhile exploring. Thanks.